So guys, thank you everybody for being here to attend this section. It's great. The event as a whole has been great so far. And today I'm talking about this idea of iterated modality with a priori and analyticity. And then the problem was that the presentation would be too long. So I decided to talk about iterated modality only and leave the analytic and the a priori part for another occasion eventually. So the talk is going to be like this. We are talking about, I'll start with a short introduction of about the subject, and then I'll present two different approaches to deal with the iterated modality. One that I call a standard interpretation, and then S5 denying approach, and the newer approach that is called 2D interpretation. After that, I'll present a few challenges for this 2D interpretation. A few arguments that I'll try to advance against this 2D interpretation, and then I conclude some ideas. So Nathan Salmons has argued that things that are possible may be merely contingently possible instead of necessarily possible. The idea is that we can, using the possible word vocabulary here, is the claim that what is possible may vary depending on which possible word is being taken into consideration. That is equivalent to saying that things that qualify as viable possibilities from a possible word W1 might be different from the viable possibilities from a different possible word W2. So the standard interpretation of modality is that the S5 modologic system is the correct system to understand the metaphysical modality, and in this context, metaphysical modality behaves in a non-relativized manner. The S5 denying approach, on the other hand, argues that metaphysical modality should be understood in a relativized way. As a result, S5 modologic system is regarded too strong. So the standard interpretation is adopting implicitly this, what we call these two modal principles, that MEP5 and the MEP4, which is basically saying that if phi is possible, then phi is necessarily possible, which is pretty close to what the characteristic axiom of S5 is stating. And also that if phi is possibly possible, then phi is possible. What is interesting that we don't have many arguments defending this idea, but it's commonly accepted. And the general, pretty quickly on this subject here, is the semantics for modal logic, which is basically a triple, a set of possible words and relation, accessibility relation between possible words, and also a function that is going to be attributing truth values for each sentence or letter. But the interesting thing is that if we are presupposing that S5 is the correct model system, we do not need to talk about the accessibility relation, that we have this more simplified clause for necessity, as you can see in this slide there. But if we are working in a weaker system, then we have to, we cannot just offer the simplified version there. This model shows us a visualization of the situation for S5 a model system in place, which is a model which is transitive, symmetrical, and also reflexive. In this case, if P is true in the possible word W3, what happens is that P is necessarily possible because it is going to be possible for all possible words, since every possible word can see all the other possible words. But if we are working in a relativized modality, which means that what's true or what's possible is relative to which possible word we are talking about, then the accessibility relation needs to be added, and what we're going to have for necessity and the possibility are disclosed, as you can see here. So, but do we have really arguments for to give up on S5, thinking about doing metaphysics in a weaker system? Nathan Salmons has presented a paper, The Logic of What Might Have Been, in which he argues for a case against S4, and since S4 is presupposed in S5, the argument goes to both systems. And the intuition is that the case that someone says that the case against a S4 modalogic system, transitivity of accessibility relation, stems from the intuition that a particular material artifact, say a particular wooden table, which we may call it wood, could have originated from a slightly different matter from its actual matter M, but not from an entirely different matter. The intuition here is that for any specific object made of a specific matter M, it's possible that it could have been made of a slightly different matter, but an entirely different matter is not a possibility for it. That's the intuition, and we can then formulate an argument based on that. The argument, all we need to do is, in the first step, is to suppose that wood originates from the matter M, and then we have two premises that it's step 2 says that it's possible that wood originates from the matter M line, and it's not possible that wood originate from the matter M star. M line is a matter that's slightly different from matter M, so it's a possibility for wood to be originated from the matter M star, and from the matter M line. And the M star is significantly different from the matter M, which is not a possibility for wood anymore. So we have another premise here that is a counterfactual condition, which says that if wood had originated from the matter M line, then it would have been possible to would originate from the matter M star. So what we are saying here is that this M star is not a possibility for wood, but things could have been different if wood had originated from the matter M line. So we can follow the steps of their arguments, and it's quite simple. So it's possibly possible that would originate from the matter M star. It's coming from 2 and 4, and it's not possible that would originate from the matter M star, but it is possibly possible that would originate from the matter M star. And we can conclude now that it's not true that if it is possibly possible that would originate from the matter M star, then it's possible that would originate from the matter M star. That's to say that we are denying the S4 axiom, and that should be enough for us to have to give up on S4 and also at S5, sorry. So we have this picture here that helps us to understand what's going on. We have this possible word W3, where P is true. P in this case is just saying that the word is originate from this matter that is completely different from the actual matter M. This matter is M star. So in this case, it is possibly possible that would, we are looking from the possible word W1. So it is possibly possible that would originate from this matter completely different, but it's not really possible because there is no possible word accessible from the possible word W1 where the P is true. So what we need to understand here is that transitivity of the accessibility relation is not in place anymore because we have this problem concerning the essence, the material composition of a specific object. So we have now this two-dimensional S5 friendly interpretation is what we can see here. The Murray and Wilson present this idea in a recent paper. And what they try to do is accommodate this problem regarding wood and the material composition of a specific object in a system that is capable of accommodating S5 and S4. And what they try to do, in order to do that, what they do is they relativize the metaphysical necessities and also metaphysical possibilities to indicative actuality. Let's take a look at how the interpretation works. Now, according to their understanding, a new parameter needs to be added to the standard semantics to model logic to work as a function from indicative actualities, indicatively actual words to truth value. Strictly speaking, the implementation is a kind of a two-dimensional semantic. As they say, the theory is formally analogous to epistemic interpretation of two-dimensional semantics framework. But it's important for us to know here that we are talking about metaphysically exclusive, not about any epistemic interpretation of modality. So what they do is something like that. Formally speaking, that's their semantics, the new semantics. What we need to understand is that they add this new parameter here, W at, which is a function that picks out one possible word to be considered as indicatively actual. So we can read in this more simple formulation here below that necessarily P is true if and only if in taking W1 as indicatively actual, P is true in every possible word accessible from W1. That's the idea. I'll explain it a little bit better in a minute. So we have this new model that I created here for us to understand what's going on. What we have, in fact, is these relativizations to indicatively actual possible words. And we, in what they call these different relativizations of subspace. So we have the subspace S1, subspace S2, and the subspace S3. And what's happening is that we are relativizing the truth values of the propositions there to a specific possible word. In S1, what we have is the possible word W1 as indicative actual, and the S2, we have this possible word W2, and so on. But the question is, how can this new model really deal with the case of wood? So what is happening there is that in S1, where W1 is indicative actual word, and the wood originates from the mother M, the proposition P turns out to be false in W1 S1. P is false in all possible words in S1. Also, not only possibly P is false, but also possibly P is false in W1 S1. As you can see here, what happens is that the P is false here, so it should, all the other propositions should be, in all other possible words, P should also be false. But if we consider the subspace S2, where W2 is the indicative actual word, and wood originates in this case from the mother M line and not the mother N, that's important, the proposition possibly P comes out true, because we are taking the possible word W2 as indicative actual. So what happens is that the proposition in this case, not only possibly P is true, but also necessarily possibly P is true in the subspace subspace 2, where the possible word W2 is the indicative actual word. So in both cases, the model logic S5, the model logic system S5 is preserved. Either it is impossible that would originate from the mother M star, then it's necessarily the case. That's what's happening in the subspace S1. Or it is possible that would originate from the mother N star, then it's necessarily the case. That's exactly what happens in the subspace S2. Either way, S5 is validated in this new approach. So now that we have this new understanding, I'll try to present a couple of arguments against this to the interpretation approach to metaphysical modality. So the first argument is inspired by a paper from David Kaplan. Kaplan presents a paradox that shows up in the naive foundation of possible word semantics. The idea is that the problem is related to the notion of maximality. And in general, the idea is that for any arrangement of all propositions that one considers, there will always be propositions left out. So the argument attacks the notion of maximal. So the argument is basically attack the notion of maximal consistent sets and the maximal consistent sets of prepositions. And then we can formulate the arguments like this. We can assume that S is a maximal set of prepositions if only if for any preposition P, either P or its negation is a member of S. So let's begin to suppose a possible word W and a preposition P, which represents the conjunction of all prepositions concerning W. And the problem shows up when a preposition refers to P. For example, let's think about a person A and a future time T, and suppose that it is possible that A thinks of P at T. We can call this preposition specifically Q. The problem then is that Q, it seems, cannot be part of P. Nevertheless, P was supposed to represent all the prepositions. Therefore, we can conclude that either P did not represent all the prepositions in the first place. All the prepositions such as Q cannot constitute genuine prepositions, and it seems we not have reasons to think that. But that's not a problem specifically to the interpretation. That's a problem for any attempt to provide a semantic for a modalogic system, which Kaplan says is naive formulation, which is based on naive set theory. But we can formulate a specific problem to the interpretation. It's more or less like this. We need to consider this preposition P here. And the P is saying that would W1 S1 is identical to would W1 S2. And we can ask, is P a member of W1 S1 or a member of W1 S2? Intuitively, P is neither a member of W1 S1 nor a member of W1 S2. If P is not a member of W1 S1, then not P should be. However, for the precisely same reasons that P is not a member of W1 S1, not P cannot be a member of W1 S1 as well. So we can conclude that W1 S1 is not maximal, therefore W1 S1 is not a possible word. That's a more technical problem, but we can also formulate another problem that we can see here. We just need to consider the preposition P line, and the preposition P line is asking would W1 S1 is claiming that would W1 S1 is identical to would W1 S2, and we can ask which notion of identity is present in the preposition P line. So the standard interpretation of semantics is going to say that it is transword identity, and transword identity, of course, is the main is the notion of identity used to formalize semantics for modalogic. There is no special cases there. Of course, we can use another notion, but that's a most natural one, is the notion of transword identity. But what happened to this new notion of trans-subspace identity here? The 2D theorists can only use transword identity within each subspace, not outside. Outside of each subspace, one would have to come up with something different, such as trans-subspace identity. The problem with this notion is that it's a brand new concept which nobody is familiar with, and it's not explicitly defined. Additionally, it's not clear the role that such a concept would be playing in the theory as a whole. In fact, it's hard to see how it could be used elsewhere apart from make sense of the preposition P. So what happens here is that if we ask if there is some notion of identity in different subspaces, the 2D theorist is providing us with a new different concept that is not usual, and also it's not explicitly defined anywhere in the theory. Another problem with the theory is that this idea of extensional adapts the theory. And what I mean by that is that the semantic structure used to represent modality should hold what I'm calling here an isomorphic one-to-one relation with the model concept, which is supposed to represent. That's to say that for each possibility, there must be one and only one corresponding possible word. Arguably, that's the case considering both the standard interpretation of modality and also S5 denial approach. However, regarding to the interpretation, things seems to be quite different. Understand the possible word as maximal sets of propositions, as you can see defined here. W is a possible word if and only if for any proposition P, either P or its negation is a member of W. So we can assume that, let's suppose that W represents the possibility P in the semantic theory. The substitution of that proposition, substitution of propositions that are a member of W by their respective negations gives us a brand new possible word, W star, which represents an also brand new possibility P star. So that's a quite straightforward reasoning, but it allows us to show that the concept of possible word characterized as above holds the isomorphic relation with the modal concept of possibility, what is suited to play the role of representing modality. The problem is that analogous reasoning cannot be advanced if one adopts the 2D interpretation. At least in some contexts, one-to-one isomorphic relation between possible words and possibility cannot be established. In reality, regarding each possible words, in each possibility, there will be countless possible words. So another problem with the theory is regarding essentialism, which is what motivated someone presented the words data and the relation with that with the new approach of the 2D interpretation. As we see before, the 2D interpretation was motivated to try to accommodate Wood's data in S5. But it's not clear that they can really do that. In order to understand what's the problem here, let's consider how does S5 denying approach handle Wood's case. Wood's case exploits the idea that there is a threshold according to which if the amount of overlapping matter used in the manufacturing process of making wood is smaller than X, then the table which eventually comes out of this process cannot be wood. So what the S5 denying approach accommodates the case, restricting accessibility relation between possible words, which to the interpretation cannot do anymore. That gives it tools to say that any word that represents a situation in which the threshold condition is not satisfied represent an impossibility for wood. But what about 2D interpretation? The problem there is that the questions of it's possible or not for it to be made of the mother M star does not have a straight answer. Actually, it seems to have an ambiguity that needs to be settled before, and this ambiguity is regard to which word is being taken as indicatively actual. If we take the possible word W1 as indicatively actual, the answer is no. Wood could not have been made of M star. Otherwise, if we take either W2 or W3 as indicatively actual, then the answer is going to be yes. Wood could have been made of the mother M star. So we have to, first thing we have to answer which word is being taken as indicatively actual. So this idea of indicatively actuality is unrestricted. My main concern with the account is that there is no limiting case. There is no threshold to restrict how different the word that is being taken as indicatively actual can be. In reality, there is nothing in the theory preventing us from taking as indicatively actual a word substantively different from the actual word. We could even take a WM, a possible word so dramatically different from the actual word that is a possibility for wood to be made of iron instead of wood. 2D interpretation does not offer any tool that could rule out that possibility. So what you can conclude from that is that 2D interpretation does not seem to accommodate essentialism anymore. Another problem is that we talked a little bit about this already, but is the idea that 2D interpretation is conciliatory. 2D interpretation wants to give a decent treatment of Wood's data within an S5 modological framework. And I think that even if they can provide an S5 friendly theory, I do not believe that any S5 support will adopt it. We have just a few arguments in the literature supporting S5, directly supporting S5, and one of them was provided by Plantinga, and it more or less what follows. Are there propositions that are in fact possible, but would have been impossible had things been different in some way? The answer, I think, is clear. They could not have been impossible. So what he's saying that some propositions that are possible could not have been possible. Now suppose that we have these two different notions of impossible in a given subspace and contingently impossible. Suppose that P is considered impossible. Assuming we accept the Plantinga's argument, we will be compelled to accept that P could not have been possible. Could not have been possible. It is impossible, but could not have been possible. That seems to be a problem for those who do not accept S5. But the question is the situation any better for those who think that P would be possible if another word had been taken as indicatively action? All they're saying is that P is impossible relatively to some words taken as indicatively action, but not to others. Would that be enough to persuade the Plantinga to accept it to the interpretation? As far as I can see, if the Plantinga's argument works against S5 deniers, then it also works against it to the interpretation. Another problem that I have with the theory is this notion of a total universe. And the idea here is that it's a well-known fact that S5 model logic is compatible with isolated subspace of possible words. However, I think the appeal of what Plantinga is saying is not only that any possible word must be accessible to all other possible words in a given subspace. That is what the S5 can deliver. But also that subspace is the total universe of possible words, what S5 does not offer. In this case, accessibility relation between possible words can be called total, which means that for any possible words that one picks out, that possible word will be accessible to any other existing possible word, not all the other possible words in a given subspace. That's the notion of total universe. And that seems to be what Plantinga is really trying to argue for. So as final thoughts, I can say that even if it, to the interpretation does manage to accommodate Woods data within a S5 framework, it's still unable to deliver a notion of accessibility relation between possible words characterized as total, as we just seen. So in the best case scenario, the accessibility relation among the possible words in the 2D interpretation is an equivalency relation, but not a total relation. So thank you all for listening. We have here a few reference of this work.
Thank you, Fernando. We have a time for short question. We exceeded the time a little bit, so we have
I'm sorry for that.
In 4 or 5 minutes. So, do you have time for a question? Bruno Ramos Mendonça has a question. Bruno, you can unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much for your talk, Fernando. It was very interesting. Well, my question is more for clarification, because let us say usually 2D semantics, two-dimensional semantics, the words play a double function, right? In one sense, they just evaluate propositions, and in this new sense that the two-dimensional semantics is put in place, they also ascribe propositions to sentences. So this is the standard issue, right?
Yeah.
But it isn't clear for me what your words are doing that would be reasonable to say that this is a two-dimensional semantics. They are evaluating propositions, but what is the other role that they are playing? This isn't clear for me.
Okay, that's a really good question. And the idea was developed by Murray and Wilson. I'm trying to basically argue against it. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So what the 2D idea comes from this new function that is speaking out of the set of possible words, one specific word to be considered as indicatively action. And once we do that, we can reevaluate the truth of sentential letters in each possible word. And that's the idea that why it might be called as a two-dimensional semantics.
Again, just for clarification, so in this framework, you're like taking one possible world as a proxy for saying what is possible and what is not possible. Is this?
Yes,
okay.
That's exactly the point.
Okay.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fernando.
Thank you all.